Between discussing other head coaching candidates and identifying and analyzing new football commitments, there's a lot of stuff to talk about on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Let's get right on into it.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. For those who are not aware of who I am a credentialed media member for Cardinals Sports Zone, and I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. As I mentioned, it is a jam-packed show for you. On this Tuesday edition of the show, we will begin by discussing two more coaching candidates, both in the Pac-12, and we will explain why both Mick Cronin and Andy Enfield are long shots for the Louisville men's basketball head coaching position. We'll then transition into football, where the 2022 schedule has been released. We'll give first initial takeaways and reactions. And then finally, since we recorded the Monday edition of the show, the football program has received two more commitments. Scott Satterfield and company are on fire. This time, the two commitments are Martel Hight Jr. and Jayden Davis. We'll talk about what both of those guys bring to the table. Before we get into the content of today's show, you can follow my personal Twitter at dpence_, as you can see in the bottom left hand of your screen, and the podcast Twitter page is at LO_Louisville. So let's get right on into the show. We've been kind of, going throughout the possible candidates for the men's basketball head coaching position that is open for the Louisville Cardinals. Yesterday, we discussed the feasibility of the Cardinals hiring either Nate Oates or Eric Musselman from Alabama and Arkansas, respectively. We're going to now shift toward the West Coast, where UCLA's Mick Cronin and USC's Andy Enfield have both been linked to the job by various media members. But I'm here to tell you that both of those guys are a long shot in terms of being candidates in this particular race. We'll start out with probably the more popular of the two, that is UCLA head coach Mick Cronin. Louisville fans obviously are familiar with him, back from his days at Cincinnati, to where he led the Bearcats to the tournament in each of his last 9 seasons at the helm of the Bearcat program. In his 3 seasons at UCLA, his first year he went 19-12. Last season, most notably, was the Cinderella run to the Final Four, where they lost on a buzzer beater to Gonzaga. And then this year, they're 16-2. And ranked inside of, the top 10. So Mick Cronin has the Bruins, has that train rolling. It's a long shot for a couple reasons. Number one, he's making $4 million annually. He got a contract extension at the end of this past season, back in April after the Final Four. But arguably, I'm not necessarily seeing the allure for Mick Cronin to leave UCLA and come to Louisville. I will say that a lot of people, I'm not necessarily on the message boards, contrary to popular belief, because some people think that I'm, very much frequently on the Louisville message boards. That is not the case. But this is actually a screenshot from a buddy who was on the UCLA boards. And it seems like now that most of the panic of Cronin coming to Louisville is kind of coming from the UCLA side in terms of that fan base, because, when you gauge where, the Louisville fan base's head is at, most of it's to Kenny Payne. You had people that backed Bruce Pearl, but now they're, Eric Musselman is a popular figure. You have a couple of people talking about, Mick Cronin, but not many. It seems like, the overwhelming majority is with Kenny Payne. So when I saw the screenshots of the UCLA boards and multiple, Bruins fans and posters were, claiming that, hey, this is, Louisville's number one guy. Louisville would be stupid not to make a call and engage Cronin's interest. And I'll respond to that in 2 ways. Number one, obviously, I'm not necessarily in the know, so to speak. I don't know who the number one candidate is. You would think it's Kenny Payne by the way that the fan base talks about him, and it has backed him, and the rumors that are swirling in that realm. But I haven't heard anything from anyone that I trust that would know about the situation that would lead me to believe that Mick Cronin is a serious candidate in this running. Secondly, when it comes to reaching out, they may have reached out through back channels and stuff like that, but reaching out and being a serious candidate are kind of few. Are there sometimes is a big distinction between the two. And like I said, at this point in time, I don't see why Mick Cronin would leave UCLA. It's not like it's a better job. UCLA is a lateral move at best to Louisville. It can be argued that UCLA is a better program. I mean, they have the most national titles in NCAA history. So, it's been reported that he and his family love the Los Angeles area. They're a top 10 team that have this program rolling. And I don't necessarily see why he would potentially leave unless he wants to get back to his Midwest roots, which could possibly be, it could be a reason if he wanted to come back to the area. But it seems like at this point it's a long shot. And, coming from Louisville fans, there's kind of a mixed opinions. I think UCLA views Mick Cronin, UCLA fans view him in a different light than Louisville fans. A lot of Louisville fans that I've talked to would see that hire as somewhat uninspiring. They don't necessarily think it would be a good move, but in opposition to what UCLA fans saying, that, Mick Cronin is one of the better coaches in college basketball. He led the team to a Final Four last year. I think that the truth kind of lies somewhere in the middle. That's kind of, usually what happens is the truth is somewhere in the middle. But, Mick Cronin, a very solid coach. Coaching style wise, he's got a 68% win-loss percentage of 422 and 195. Mick Cronin, like his proteges, Rick Pitino and company, Bob Huggins, etc. Very much a defensive guru. Defense leads to good offense, but ever since he got to UCLA, where there's this mantra that style points matter more in Los Angeles than they would, in the Midwest, which I'm not sure how true that is. But it seems like this, the past couple teams for UCLA have been better offensively than any other team that, Cronin has had, at Cincinnati, etc. So it seems like, Jeff Goodman wrote for, watchstadium.com, Cronin is, quote unquote, letting them play, so to speak. So although UCLA does have pretty solid defense, they're definitely one of the more offensively advanced teams that Cronin has had. It's still a long shot that we see him on the Cardinal sidelines next year. The other coach in the Pac-12 that has gotten linked to this position is USC coach Andy Enfield. Enfield most notably led that 2013 Florida Gulf Coast Dunk City team to a Sweet 16 appearance. Was with the Eagles for 2 seasons and has been with Southern Cal ever since. In his, let's see, how much is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In 8 seasons at the helm of the Trojan program, he's made the NCAA tournament 3 times. Would have been 4 had there been one in the whole COVID, the start of the pandemic, etc. Now they're 18-3. So Andy Enfield is another option that I think would be a good coach. Like Mick Cronin, I think there would be good options for Louisville. I'm just not necessarily sure that this is the right fit in the right time. Number one, it wouldn't necessarily be the most inspiring hire. He is a solid recruiter. He does have he did get Evan Mobley and Isaiah Mobley, but that there were some family ties there, etc. I've got Onyeka Okongwu, so he's been very good with recruiting big men, which have anchored his team's defense. And, USC's been a very, very solid defensive team. Some of the gripes that I've seen from Trojan fans is that, his style of play is somewhat uninspiring. It's not necessarily great offense. So if it's not, if it's not inspiring for USC fans, you would have to think it wouldn't necessarily be inspiring for Louisville fans as well. On the opposite end of, the spectrum from Cronin, it's not necessarily why would Cronin leave? Why would Cronin leave USC for Louisville? Now it's why would Louisville go after Andy Enfield? I'm not saying he's not qualified. I'm not saying that he's not a good enough coach, because I I do think he is a solid coach. I'm a fan of Florida Gulf Coast, so I loved, seeing him and what he did with that Dunk City team. Ultimately, contract-wise, he's making under Cronin, who makes $4 million a year, who's I think is the highest-paid coach in the Pac-12. Overall, I do believe, obviously, that Louisville is a better job than USC. If the Cards were, interested, maybe Enfield wants to get closer to his hometown in Pennsylvania. I do think that if Louisville was seriously interested, there definitely would maybe at least be an interview. But it seems like at this time, the only link between the two were, initial lists right after, Chris Mack had agreed to the buyout, settlement and stuff like that. That's the only time you saw him in the lists, guys that could possibly be in the running. But at this point, I think that both of them are long shots for different reasons. And at the end of the day, I think that it would take something in which, Louisville has to go down the list in terms of, the coaching big board, to possibly, interview or hire, two of these guys or one of these guys. I can't even speak today. But at the end of the day, we'll continue to go through the candidates in a diligent manner. Thursday, it will be Big Ten. We'll talk about Matt Painter and Chris Holtman. But for now, in terms of the two Pac-12 coaches, like I said, kind of not necessarily something that I have truly seen entertained by, either party. And there hasn't really been a lot of speculation outside of, the initial reports. So I want to take this time now to, transition more into the football side of things, where the 2022 schedule for the Louisville football program has been finalized after the ACC show on the ACC network last night, that basically unraveled the schedule week by week. We'll talk about that here in just a second after we talk about our friends at BetOnline. There might be less football being played, but BetOnline.net has way more odds and info for this playoff season. From scores, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline is the number one spot for all things NFL betting in 2022. And it's not just football. BetOnline.net's basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC odds coverage is the best in the business. From sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline is your number one online wagering destination. It's the fastest and easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports and play your favorite games. And BetOnline is where the game starts. At this time, I want to thank you personally once again for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, including YouTube now, 5 days a week, your team every day. Transitioning into the football side of things, beginning talking about the finalized schedule. I want to do an initial reaction segment based upon kind of where my head was at when I saw the schedule. And I think, looking at the 12 games on the schedule for Louisville, I think that lack of a huge rant and explanation. The main takeaway is it starts out favorable and then it gets very challenging at the end of the season. The Cardinals, the non-conference opponents had already been determined and the dates had been determined. The first one was on September 10th. That was in Orlando against Central Florida. So the first week was going to always be a conference opponent. And I think that Louisville really has a good opportunity here in week one on the road at Syracuse, who, seemingly since the team up in I'm telling you, I can't speak. Since Teddy Bridgewater's team that went on to ultimately win the Sugar Bowl in the 2012-13 season, ever since that team lost up in Syracuse, the Cardinals have really, handled this ACC rivalry. The Cardinals will start out at Syracuse, a team that they absolutely throttled on the Lamar Jackson Day this past season. The first 4 games of the year at Syracuse, at UCF, Florida State, and South Florida at home. I do think that, Syracuse is going to be one of those to where, you never want to call it a gimme game, because I don't think that that's necessarily doing justice for the opposition, especially not on the road in the season opener against a conference opponent. But I do think that this is probably one of the more favorable ACC matchups of the season. Central Florida is going to be a tough one on the road. Florida State, you can't overlook. We'll see how good the Seminoles are next year. South Florida hasn't necessarily played all that great in years past. And then before the bye week, it's at Boston College and at Virginia. The Cardinals beat Boston College last season, and they almost beat Virginia. They should have beat Virginia. We're up 17 to begin the fourth quarter. I believe Brennan Armstrong has announced that he was coming back. But ultimately, this is a very favorable first half of the schedule. This is where, if the Cardinals are serious about taking that next step forward, they have to take advantage and execute at the beginning of the 2022 calendar year. Or the calendar year, it's already the calendar year, the 22 season, because you do have the bulk of your the favorable conference opponents, because I think that Louisville's going to be better than Syracuse. They're going to be better than Boston College. They're going to be better than Virginia, although they do struggle in Charlottesville. I do think that albeit they're probably better than all four of the conference opponents that they have on the schedule in the first 6 games, and then South Florida and Central Florida are both winnable as well. So I think that you have to at least probably get to 4-2 has to be kind of the floor of where you are, because the next 6 are really kind of challenging, outside of maybe one. But ultimately 4-2, 5-1, maybe even, I don't want to jump the gun, 6-0. You have to be striving for something like that to be able to take the next step forward in year 4 under head coach Scott Satterfield. So looking into the next next 6 games on the schedule, this is where things kind of get a little interesting, because they have the bye week on October 15th, and then they come back and they will host Pittsburgh, they'll host Wake Forest, they will host James Madison, and then go on the road to Clemson, host NC State, and then at Kentucky. I'm going to start out with the last 3 games of the year. Clemson, the Cardinals caught them at a down year this season. Should have beaten them at the very end. Ultimately, wasn't meant to be. They're going to be, in Memorial Stadium this year at Clemson. The Tigers are preseason top 10 once again. They bring in and DJ is back. Cade Klubnik, a very, very solid freshman quarterback, is coming in. They've got a solid recruiting class, and they're healthy once again. The defense is going to be incredible for the Clemson Tigers, especially the defensive line, one of the best in Dabo's tenure. Is what I predict. Clemson, NC State bringing Devin Leary back. They're solid. And then at Kentucky, we saw the past, since 2018, the Cardinals just don't necessarily match up well with Kentucky at the moment. So it seems like all 3 of those games at the very end, you would assume that all 3 are going to be losses. So that's why the first 6 games of the year are that much critical for Louisville. Just because you have to, get the wins where you can get them. The 3 in between that is kind of where it gets interesting. No Kenny Pickett for Pittsburgh any longer, but still Pat Narduzzi's team is still very solid. Wake Forest, we saw last year, competed for, an ACC championship, and then you have James Madison, who, a former FCS program, who now, is in the FBS and is very, very, a very solid. Not necessarily a gimme game. I do think that Louisville ends up winning this game, but it is a possible trip-up game. You have to come into this, laser focused and really focused on winning this, because this is a possible game where you can find yourself tripping up and losing a game that you're not supposed to. But overall, kind of echoing the sentiments that I had, at the very end of the season, this has to be a year for Louisville, in my opinion, to where they win, 7 to 8 games at the minimum, because they do have the opportunities to do so. It's all about execution. In the past 2 years, there's been games, that come down the wire that haven't really, sided in Louisville's favor. That has to end this year. We had to see some more improvement as Scott Satterfield's tenure goes on. We will do that. We'll kind of break down the schedule more, obviously, in the off season and when football season gets into full swing of things. But I want to take this time now to transition back into the recruiting world. Since we recorded the bonus episode, the recruiting episode on Sunday evening that aired yesterday, midday, Louisville picked up 2 more commitments, both defensive backs. So Scott Satterfield, since Sunday, has received 6 defensive back commits, which is absolutely incredible. I can't speak. Incredible. It's something that we see that it's a position of need, and Scott Satterfield said, really? Well, here you go. We will break down the two most recent commitments here in just a second after we talk about our friends at Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse having security when you have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket? It allows you to save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Another great thing about Rock Auto is it's a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and the prices are reliably low for every customer. So do yourself a favor, go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck right locked on in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. Moving into the last segment of the show dedicated to Flyville 23, the 2023 football recruiting class has added 2 new members in the past, 24 hours or so. The first one came on Monday morning in the form of cornerback commit Martel Hight Jr. From Rome, Georgia, 5'11", 161 pounds. It kind of is a two-way player, so plays both wide receiver and cornerback. Currently is not ranked. I will tell you, at the moment, I wouldn't necessarily put a ton of stock into a recruit not being ranked if they're part of the 2023 class. I think those rankings will start to be taken more seriously as spring goes along, as we get into summer. That's when you start to see guys get their proper rankings, and if anything is a telltale sign, Hight's offer sheet is very solid. In the past 12 days or so, he's picked up offers from Indiana, Kentucky, Wake Forest, Vanderbilt. He has an offer from Florida, where Wesley McGriff was the secondaries coach last year. And overall, I think that we're probably going to see him as I think he's going to be right there as a top 500 player, a mid 3-star, high 3-star type of guy. Not necessarily the biggest defensive back, only 5'11", but I'm pretty impressed when I watch his film because he plays a lot bigger than he actually is size-wise. I love his speed, his footwork, his technique in terms of high pointing the football. Although he is a smaller guy, he has a ton of athleticism, a very solid tackler, really aggressive in his pursuit, in terms of open field tackles, does well in running game, defending the run and stuff like that. So I think, in his film so far, I've really only seen him as an outside corner. I wonder in this system if Brian Brown and Wesley McGriff look to use him, maybe as a slot corner, just due to the fact that he has a ton of foot speed, and I would, probably trust him in terms of, guarding opposing slot receivers and stuff like that, smaller receivers that are pretty quick, because I think that he has the quickness to keep up with them. Being a wide receiver, he obviously has good hands, to work with in terms of interceptions and stuff like that. I love his overall aggressive coverage ability. I think that he does very good with his eyes and watching the quarterback and being able to project where the quarterback is going to go with the football. So I like this commitment for Louisville. Obviously, he's going to be a guy that may take a little while for him to see the field in terms of maybe take the year 2 or so, just because I think that they're continually adding more defensive backs and they're going to continue to add some more. So that's something to keep an eye out on. The second commitment, which came just a little while ago, was in the form of high 3-star safety Jayden Davis, also a Georgia native. This one from Collins Hill and Sewanee, Georgia, 2023 guy, 6'2" safety, 175 pounds, ranked as the 428th best player in the country. Holds offers from Kentucky, Georgia Tech, Arkansas, Michigan, Missouri, NC State, Mississippi, Pittsburgh, Tennessee, TCU, Utah. The list goes on. I really like this commitment. It seems like, one thing that Brian Brown, has done, on the recruiting trail, and what Louisville has really emphasized, in the secondary, especially in the back half at the safety position, is a ton of size at safety. Kendra Duncan Jr., Quinterio Cole, Josh Minkins, Ben Perry, MJ Griffin, all basically over 6'1". Excuse me. You see, Jayden Davis fit that same mold at 6'2". I really love this kid's film. Reminds me, kind of a Calvin Pryor-esque type prospect. I don't want to necessarily say, go as far in saying, he reminds me truly of Calvin Pryor, because I think that Calvin Pryor is just that special. But as a prospect, I see a lot of similarities, because he's very, very, he's very, very instinctive in coverage. I love, his decision-making in the back end of the secondary. I think that he's big enough to guard opposing tight ends, and he's quick enough to line up and guard, opposing slot guys out wide. Has a lot of versatility. Also a wide receiver, so he's got, a ton of speed, a ton of, lateral quickness, agility, and overall, good hands in terms of interceptions and stuff like that. So I love the additions that they made recently to the defensive back room. I think that, some guys could play early. Some guys are going to take a little bit. I think Jayden Davis is a player that you could see, play some early snaps. Maybe not starting, because you have guys like Ben Perry, you have Ben Perry, Josh Minkins Jr., etc. So it may take a little bit for him to see the field, but I do think he could possibly be in the rotation, starting right out of the gate, because I just love his ability to, tackle on the open field. He's very solid in the run game, and that kind of reminds me of Quinterio Cole. You could see him, possibly top 5 any given season in, total team tackles. I think he sees the field really well. He's very solid in watching plays progress, and, trusting his reads and shooting gaps, and, making, plays and blowing plays up, at the line of scrimmage or in the backfield. So I'm very, very pleased with what the work that Scott Satterfield has put into this defensive back recruiting. These two in particular, I think that, at the very least, it adds depth to positions that need depth after next season. Like I talked about on yesterday's episode, we're going to see that there's going to be a lot of holes to fill outside of the 2023, before the 2023 season in the secondary and the cornerback and the safety room. So we'll continue to talk about recruiting. Is as much as we get the news, it seems like right now there's at least a commit a day. We might have the recruiting class filled out by late February. The Pierce Clarkson effect is in full swing of things. But, great work that Satterfield and company are doing on the recruiting trail. 6 defensive backs are committed to the program now. Some you're offering immediate help. Others are in the there are 3 defensive backs in Flyville 23. So we will continue to talk about recruiting. When we get some more recruiting news, the Cardinals are off to a great start. Currently heavy top 15 class in the 2023 cycle. Before we get out of here, like I mentioned, we talked about Mick Cronin and Andy Enfield, why both of those guys are outsiders on the outside looking in, the long shots, so to speak, for the Louisville men's basketball head coaching position. We gave the initial takeaways from the 2022 football schedule being released, and we also analyzed the commitments from both Martel Hight Jr. and Jayden Davis. A couple quick shout-outs before we get out of here. The Cardinals Sports Zone podcast that's on fire. Jeremy Wallman is, breaking stories left and right. You can check that, the latest podcast out at cardinalsportszone.com. Also, the Locked On Bets podcast, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert analysis from Lee Sterling. You can get that on the Odyssey app or wherever you like to get your podcast. Jeremy will be back on the show tomorrow to discuss the Malik Williams saga, the UNC game, and just the overall recruiting trend as a whole. I will say I've gotten some comments on the background lighting. I understand it's not ideal with it being a lighter background. I will say that I'm looking into improving the background so it's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. I apologize to those that maybe see it as an eyesore or something like that, but I did get the message loud and clear in the comment section of a couple episodes. So, but I'm just letting you know I have looked into improving the background. Easier said than done, but we will get that taken care of. That's going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Shout out to everybody for liking, rating, subscribing, sharing the podcast on YouTube, all the streaming services out there. I appreciate you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you right back here.